What if one story could reshape the way you think about money, life, and learning English? Let's dive into it together. Welcome back to LMJ English, where you learn powerful life lessons while improving your English, one story at a time. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss an inspiring new story that could change the way you think, speak, and live. Two fathers, two perspectives. In the warm, breezy mornings of Hawaii, where palm trees sway gently and waves kiss the shores, a young boy named Robert began to notice something strange about the world around him. His life in many ways was like any other child's, filled with school, friends, and family dinners. But what made Robert's world different was that he had two fathers. These weren't two men living in the same house or sharing responsibilities. No, one was his real biological father, and the other was the father of his childhood best friend. Robert called them Poor Dad and Rich Dad. And the names weren't about how much money they had in their wallets. They were about how they thought about money, and that, as Robert would later discover, made all the difference. Poor Dad was the image of respectability. He was highly educated, with a steady government job, a clean desk, and a strong belief in the power of traditional education. He believed that success was a straight road. Go to school, get good grades, find a secure job, and work there until retirement. For him, a paycheck was something to be thankful for, a sign that you were doing things right. But despite his degrees and titles, Robert saw that his poor dad often worried about money. Bills piled up, paychecks disappeared quickly, conversations about wealth were avoided, even feared. Rich Dad, on the other hand, was a businessman who hadn't finished 8th grade. He didn't talk much about school. He talked about opportunities, investments, and the freedom that came from understanding how money truly works. He didn't see a paycheck as a reward. He saw it as a leash. To him, money was a tool, not a goal. It wasn't about working for it. It was about teaching it to work for you. At first, Robert didn't know who to believe. He loved both men. He admired Poor Dad's discipline and morals, but he couldn't ignore the calm strength that Rich Dad carried. The way he smiled when others worried, the way he seemed to have time for his family, his passions, and his dreams. As a child, Robert found himself in the middle of a quiet battle, not of people, but of ideas. Two father figures, each standing on opposite ends of a financial philosophy, each holding out a different map to life. One told him to follow the crowd. The other told him to think for himself. One warned him about the dangers of risk. The other told him risk was the path to reward. And so, standing between these two giants, Robert began to realize that life's biggest decisions often come long before you're ready to make them. He was just a boy, but he had already been handed a powerful choice to follow the path of comfort or the path of courage. It would be years before he understood the full weight of that choice. But even then a seed had been planted, a question that echoed in his young mind. What if everything I've been taught about money is only part of the truth? The power of financial education. There are moments in life that don't come with a loud announcement, no drum roll, no spotlight, but they change everything. For Robert, one of those moments arrived on a quiet afternoon when Rich Dad leaned back in his chair, looked him straight in the eyes and said, "Most people spend their entire lives working for money, but never learn how money works." The words floated in the air, simple but thunderous. They didn't just challenge Robert's ideas, they shattered them. Until then, Robert thought he understood the path to success. Go to school, get good grades, find a stable job, work hard, retire with a pension. It was a formula handed down from teachers, parents, and nearly every adult he knew, including his poor dad. But now Rich Dad was inviting him to think differently. Not just differently, but dangerously. If you want to be free, Rich Dad continued, you have to stop chasing paychecks and start learning how to make money work for you. This wasn't the kind of lesson found in textbooks. Schools taught algebra, but not assets. They taught history, but not how to build a future. No one ever explained how to handle money, how to grow it, protect it, or even understand it. Most people, Robert realized, were financially asleep, running on autopilot. They worked for years, spending all they earned and never breaking free. Rich Dad compared money to a wild horse, untamed, unpredictable, and powerful. If you don't know how to ride it, he said with a grin, it will throw you, but if you learn to master it, it will take you farther than your feet ever could. That was the essence of financial education. Not learning to fear money, but learning to control it, to guide it, to use it as a tool rather than be used by it. He introduced Robert to concepts like cash flow, passive income, and the difference between an asset and a liability. At first, the ideas felt like a foreign language. But slowly, the fog cleared. Robert started seeing the world in a new way. Stores weren't just places to shop, they were businesses generating revenue. Houses weren't just homes, they were either income-draining liabilities or powerful sources of rental income. And most importantly, jobs weren't the final destination. They were a stepping stone, a temporary stage on the road to financial freedom. For the first time, Robert felt excited about learning, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Every new idea opened a door, every lesson lit a candle. He began asking questions other kids didn't think to ask. What's the return on this investment? How does this asset generate income? What happens to my money if I do nothing with it? Financial education wasn't about greed. It was about clarity. It was about being able to walk into a room, look at an opportunity, and know whether it would help you grow or hold you back. It was about making decisions from a place of strength, not desperation. That was the gift Rich Dad gave him. Not just lessons, but a lens. A lens that allowed Robert to see the invisible game being played all around him. A game most people didn't even know they were in. And from that moment on, Robert vowed never to walk through life blindfolded again, escaping the rat race. At first the words made Robert chuckle. Rat race. It sounded like something from a cartoon, tiny rodents scurrying around, chasing cheese. But Rich Dad's tone was anything but humorous. It's not funny, he said quietly. It's tragic, because it's real. And most people are trapped in it their whole lives. As Rich Dad explained, Robert felt the laughter drain from his chest. He described a cycle that felt all too familiar, a cycle Robert had already begun to see in his poor dad's life. So it started with school. You're told to study hard, get good grades, and secure a respectable job. So you do. You work hard, and when the paychecks start coming in, you feel proud, like you've made it. But then the bills come, rent or mortgage. Utilities, a car loan, insurance, food, maybe student loans too. And before you realize it, your paycheck is gone. So what's the solution? Work harder, you work overtime, you chase a promotion, you take on more stress, hoping that more income will bring relief. And maybe it does, briefly. But with that raise comes temptation. A bigger apartment, a better phone, a shinier car. Vacations you can't quite afford. Your expenses rise to match your income, and soon you're back where you started, living from paycheck to paycheck, only now with fancier problems. Rich Dad called it the illusion of progress. It looks like success, it feels like advancement, but really it's a treadmill, one where the scenery changes, but the destination never does. People think they're running toward financial freedom, Rich Dad said, but they're really just running in circles, trapped in a system designed to keep them working, spending, and borrowing. That's when he said something that struck Robert like a thunderclap. The more you earn, the more they take. Who's they? The government, through taxes, the banks, through interest, the stores, through tempting sales, and worst of all, the lifestyle itself. A lifestyle designed by marketers and media to make you believe that buying more is being more. Poor Dad, for all his wisdom and discipline, was a prisoner of the rat race. He believed that working harder was the only way out, but Rich Dad offered Robert a secret path, not through effort alone, but through understanding. If you want to escape the rat race, he said, you must stop working for money and start building things that make money for you. He explained the power of assets, rental properties, stocks, businesses, intellectual property, things that generate income whether you're working or not, things that give you leverage, a way to multiply your effort instead of repeating it endlessly. Robert listened wide-eyed as Rich Dad painted a new picture of life, a life where your time was yours, a life where your money worked while you rested, a life where your calendar wasn't ruled by a boss, but by your dreams. Robert saw for the first time that the rat race wasn't a punishment. It was a habit, a mindset, a way of living passed down from generation to generation, and like any habit, it could be broken. Not easily, not instantly, but intentionally. That day Robert didn't just learn about money, he learned about freedom, and in his heart he made a quiet vow. I will not spend my life running for cheese. I will build something bigger. I will run toward purpose, not paychecks. Assets versus liabilities. The office was quiet except for the soft scratch of a marker moving across a whiteboard. Robert sat in front of Rich Dad, watching as two columns took shape, simple, almost childlike in appearance. On the left, Rich Dad wrote assets. On the right, liabilities. Then he turned to Robert, with the calm seriousness of someone about to reveal a secret that most people live their entire lives without knowing. This, Rich Dad said, tapping the board, is the foundation of wealth, and the reason so many smart people stay poor. Robert leaned in. Up until now he'd thought assets and liabilities were just fancy financial terms, things that accountants and bankers talked about. He'd even heard people proudly call their houses assets and their luxury cars signs of success. But today Rich Dad was about to tear down that illusion. An asset, Rich Dad said slowly, is something that puts money into your pocket. Whether you're awake or asleep, working or on vacation, it generates income. A liability, on the other hand, takes money out of your pocket. It demands attention, expenses, and often stress. He smiled, then added, most people fill their lives with liabilities thinking they're buying assets. Robert felt a jolt of realization. He thought about his poor dad, who always encouraged home ownership, believing it was the key to security. But he also remembered the arguments about rising mortgage payments, property taxes, unexpected repairs, and the stress of keeping up appearances. That house didn't feel like an asset. It felt like a responsibility, an expensive one. Rich Dad saw the confusion in his eyes. "Let me give you 2 examples," he said, "and you tell me who's building wealth." He pointed to an imaginary man named Dave, who used his $10,000 savings to buy a brand new sports car. He feels proud, admired. It turns heads, but over time the car depreciates. He pays insurance, fuel, maintenance. It costs him every month. Then he introduced another man, Alex, who used the same $10,000 to buy a small piece of rental property. It wasn't glamorous. No one complimented him for it. But it earned $200 a month in rent. And over time, the value of the land increased. Robert was silent. The truth hit hard. One man looked rich. The other was becoming rich. Rich Dad continued, "Too many people are financially drowning in things that impress others but weaken their future. They think they're rich because they have stuff. But wealth isn't about stuff. It's about structure. It's about cash flow. It's about freedom." He pulled out a sheet of paper and handed it to Robert. "From now on," he said, "I want you to draw this chart before you make a major purchase. Ask yourself, does this put money into my pocket or take it out? If it costs you, it's a liability, even if it looks good. If it earns for you, it's an asset, even if it's invisible to everyone else." That lesson didn't just change the way Robert thought about money. It changed how he looked at the world. He began to see the difference between what glitters and what grows. He noticed how so many people chased status symbols, hoping to feel secure, while never building anything that could truly set them free. From that day on, he made a promise. "I will buy assets first. I will build before I decorate. I will choose freedom over flash." Because once you understand the quiet strength of assets, you never look at wealth the same way again. Mindset shift from scarcity to abundance. The sun filtered through the window blinds, casting quiet stripes of light across the office floor. Robert sat across from Rich Dad, who had just posed a question that seemed almost too simple. When you want something but think you can't afford it, what do you say to yourself? Without thinking, Robert replied, "I just say, I can't afford it." Rich Dad leaned back in his chair, nodded, and then said the words that would stay with Robert for life. "And that is the beginning of poverty thinking." It wasn't meant as an insult. It was an awakening. Rich Dad wasn't just teaching Robert how to handle money. He was teaching him how to handle his mind. Poor people shut down their thinking by saying, "I can't," he explained. The rich train their minds to ask, "How can I?" One closes doors, the other opens possibilities. At first, this idea felt strange to Robert. Could a single sentence really shape your entire financial destiny? But Rich Dad explained further. When you say, "I can't afford it," your brain turns off. It stops searching, it stops growing. It accepts defeat before the game even begins. But when you ask, "How can I afford it?" even if you don't know the answer yet, your brain kicks into gear. It starts working for you, not against you. It starts hunting for solutions, ideas, opportunities. It was more than just grammar. It was mindset. And mindset, Rich Dad said, is the soil in which your financial future grows. Scarcity thinking says there's not enough. It creates fear, jealousy, and inaction. Abundance thinking says, there's more than enough if I learn how to find it. It creates curiosity, courage, and creativity. Robert began to practice. Instead of saying, "I can't buy that book," he asked, "What can I sell or do to earn that money?" Instead of thinking, "I'll never be rich," he asked, What do rich people do differently that I can learn? Every question opened a new window, a new path, and slowly he felt something powerful happening inside him. He was shifting from being a passive receiver of life to an active creator of it. Rich Dad encouraged him to write down challenges and list 3 ways to solve them. Even if 2 of them are crazy, he said, your brain is learning, it's stretching, it's getting stronger. The point wasn't always to find the perfect solution, but to train the mind to keep asking better questions. Robert started to notice something else. People around him often repeated scarcity phrases like mantras. Money doesn't grow on trees. We can't afford that. Only lucky people get rich. These weren't facts. They were inherited beliefs, passed down like old furniture, comfortable but limiting. Rich Dad taught him that beliefs are choices, and you can choose better ones. From that point on, Robert committed to speaking and thinking the language of abundance, not just in money but in life. He stopped asking, "What if I fail?" and started asking, "What can I learn if I try?" He stopped worrying about having enough and started building systems that created enough, because in the end, it wasn't about having $1 million. It was about having $1 million mindset, emotions and money. One rainy afternoon, as dark clouds gathered outside and the soft patter of raindrops filled the silence, Rich Dad pulled Robert aside for a private talk. He began by asking, "Robert, what is it that scares most people about money?" Robert hesitated, recalling the anxious expressions he'd seen in many adults. The constant worry, the sleepless nights, the tension that seemed to envelop every financial decision. Rich Dad continued, "It's not the money itself, but the emotions attached to it, fear, greed, and the overwhelming desire for immediate satisfaction." He explained that while many let fear dictate their actions, clinging to jobs they despised and avoiding opportunities because they were scared of failure, the rich recognized that fear is natural, but it shouldn't paralyze you. When you let fear control you, every decision becomes a risk. But when you learn to control your emotions, you begin to see opportunities even in uncertainty, Rich Dad said softly, his eyes reflecting a deep, unspoken wisdom. Robert listened intently, as Rich Dad described how greed, too, could mislead even the brightest minds. People often think that more money will fill the emptiness inside. They chase the allure of a fancier car or a bigger house, believing these things will bring happiness. But what they don't realize is that these desires, born of greed, can trap you in a cycle of endless spending and regret. Rich Dad's voice grew firmer. True success comes when you control your emotions instead of letting them control you. When you move past fear and temper your greed with wisdom, you begin to make decisions that serve your long-term freedom. As the rain continued to fall, Rich Dad shared personal stories of times when he too was overwhelmed by doubt and uncertainty. He described how he learned to pause, to reflect, and then to act, not impulsively, but with careful thought and courage. He taught Robert that the key to financial freedom wasn't just about knowing the right strategies. It was about cultivating inner strength. It was about training your mind to see setbacks as lessons and failures as stepping stones towards something greater. For Robert, this lesson was transformative, as he began to understand that managing money was as much an emotional journey as it was a practical one. In every financial decision, there was an opportunity to conquer fear, to replace anxiety with calm resolve. He learned to ask himself not, "Am I afraid to try?" but "How can I overcome this fear and learn from it?" And slowly he started to feel a shift inside, a newfound confidence that came from mastering his own heart as much as his finances. In that intimate moment, as the storm raged outside, Robert realized that the path to wealth was not paved solely with numbers and investments, but with the courage to face your emotions head-on, to embrace vulnerability, and to turn every fear into a stepping stone toward true freedom. Learning and action. One evening, as the golden light of sunset poured through the windows, Rich Dad placed a stack of books, magazines, and a small notepad in front of Robert. "This," he said with a warm smile, "is your real classroom." Gone were the heavy textbooks filled with outdated theories. Instead, Robert saw titles about investing, real estate, entrepreneurship, and mindset. It was a whole new world, one that didn't require a teacher's permission to explore. "Most people stop learning after school," Rich Dad said, "but the rich never stop. They know that knowledge is power, but only if you take action." That moment marked the beginning of Robert's self-education, a journey that would stretch far beyond the walls of any school. He devoured books not to pass exams, but to understand how the world truly worked. He asked questions, sought out mentors, and listened closely when others discussed money, not just to hear, but to learn. Rich Dad encouraged him to attend seminars, explore business ideas, and even study the habits of successful people. "The more you know," he said, "the more you grow, and the less you fear." But Rich Dad made one thing very clear: knowledge alone was not enough. "Action," he said, "is what separates dreamers from doers." He explained that many people were full of potential, but paralyzed by the need for the perfect plan. They waited until they felt ready. They waited for the right time, the right amount of money, the perfect opportunity. And as they waited, life moved on without them. Robert realized that learning wasn't just reading books. It was applying what you read. It was making small investments, even with limited money. It was tracking expenses, identifying patterns, and making new choices. It was starting a side hustle, not for fast money, but for fast growth. Every mistake became a lesson. Every step forward, a new opportunity. Rich Dad often said, "The difference between a poor person and a rich person is not talent, it's action." He told Robert the story of two friends, one always saying, "I'm going to start saving and investing, just not now," and the other saving just a small amount each week. A decade later, the first friend was still waiting. The second had quietly built a foundation of wealth. Success doesn't come from waiting. It comes from starting, he said. Robert began to act even when he wasn't sure. He started small, buying his first asset, tracking his cash flow, asking better questions. And every time he made a move, he learned something valuable. His confidence grew, not from guarantees, but from progress. Through Rich Dad's guidance, Robert discovered a powerful truth. Knowledge fuels courage, and courage fuels action. And once you begin taking action, the world around you starts to shift. Doors appear where there were only walls. Opportunities reveal themselves. The impossible becomes achievable, not all at once, but step by step. Because in the end, it isn't what you know that changes your life. It's what you do with what you know. Think like an investor. It was a quiet afternoon when Rich Dad handed Robert a crisp $1,000 bill. "Now," he said with a smile, "tell me what you would do with this." Robert stared at the bill, excitement rushing through him. His first instinct was to list the things he could buy: a new bike, cool clothes, maybe even a gadget or two. But before he could speak, Rich Dad gently took the bill back and asked, Do you want to spend like a consumer or think like an investor? That moment changed everything. Rich Dad explained that the average person sees money as something to spend. They receive it and instantly start thinking of things to buy. A newer phone, a flashier car, a more expensive lifestyle. But the investor sees money differently. To the investor, every dollar is a seed, something to plant, to grow, to multiply. When you earn money, Rich Dad said, don't ask, what can I buy? Ask, how can I use this to create more? This shift in thinking was like flipping a light switch in Robert's brain. Suddenly he saw the world through new eyes. Shopping malls became collections of businesses. Vacant buildings looked like potential investments. Even a simple coffee shop made him wonder about cash flow, rent, profit margins. He wasn't just walking through life anymore, he was analyzing it. Rich Dad gave him a challenge. For 1 week, don't spend a single dollar without asking, will this grow my future or shrink it? At first it was difficult. Old habits whispered, you've earned it, treat yourself. But with every choice Robert made, he began to understand what Rich Dad meant. Buying a book on investing. That was a growth choice. Spending on fast food every day, that was shrinkage. The exercise wasn't about being cheap, it was about being intentional. One day, Rich Dad took Robert on a walk through town. They stopped outside a small cafe with a for sale sign in the window. Most people will see this as just a closed shop, he said. But the investor asks, what does this business need to succeed? Could I own this? Could I improve it? It wasn't about having money right now, it was about building the mindset of an owner, thinking like a creator, asking questions others never thought to ask. Robert's mind started to shift from spending to strategizing. He no longer saw money as a reward. He saw it as a tool, a partner, a path. Instead of saving money just to feel safe, he began saving with a purpose, to invest, to grow, to multiply. The thrill of consumption was slowly replaced by the quiet excitement of creation. And that's when Rich Dad revealed the ultimate truth. Anyone can think like an investor. You don't need to be rich. You just need to see money as a servant, not a master. Use it wisely and it will work for you for the rest of your life. From that point forward, Robert didn't just handle money, he led it. And with every decision, he was building not just wealth, but wisdom. Overcoming criticism and starting small. There's a quiet kind of courage that rarely gets noticed. It's not the kind that stands on stage or waves a flag. It's the kind that whispers, keep going, when everyone else says, turn back. For Robert, that kind of courage was tested the moment he began living differently, thinking differently, because of Rich Dad's teachings. He didn't expect people to cheer, but he didn't expect them to resist either. It started small, casual. Comments from classmates when he skipped a movie to attend a local business seminar. Raised eyebrows from teachers when he asked questions about taxes, passive income, and investments instead of sticking to the curriculum. And then, more painfully, the concerned voice of his poor dad. Son, be careful. Don't chase dreams that will disappoint you. Focus on your studies. Get a secure job. That's the smart way. Robert respected his poor dad. He loved him deeply. So these words weren't easy to ignore. They echoed inside his mind late at night like shadows creeping into his vision. Was he making a mistake? Was he being foolish? But every time doubt crept in, Rich Dad's lessons came back louder, steadier. People will always speak from their fears, Rich Dad had said. Not because they want to limit you, but because they've limited themselves. If you absorb their fears, you'll live their life. Is that the life you want? Robert knew the answer. No. Still, he wasn't some prodigy. He didn't have $1 million inheritance or magical talent. What he did have was something more powerful, the willingness to start small. Rich Dad always emphasized this. Don't wait for the stars to align. Don't wait until you feel ready. Wealth doesn't arrive at your door. It grows from the seeds you plant now. So Robert planted his seeds. He began by saving a small amount each month, not hundreds, just what he could. He tracked his expenses religiously, like a scientist observing a new experiment. He read books on investing with a flashlight under his blanket at night. He sketched business ideas in the margins of his school notebooks. And when he earned his first few dollars in passive income, even if it was just from a small investment, he felt a surge of power, not because of the money, but because he had created it himself. Of course, people still didn't understand. That's just pocket change, they said. It's not worth the effort. But Robert smiled because he had begun to see what they couldn't. Every dollar earned passively was a brick in the foundation of freedom. Every small win was a crack in the walls of the rat race. And so, he kept going. One day, Rich Dad shared a story that cemented this belief. It was about a young woman who had only $50 to her name. She didn't wait to save more. She didn't listen to friends who told her it was pointless. She invested it carefully. That first tiny move gave her confidence, and from that confidence came bigger decisions. She didn't become wealthy overnight, but step by step her wealth grew. So did her mindset. And one day, while others were still waiting to feel ready, she was already free. Robert realized then that success doesn't arrive with fanfare. It arrives slowly, often disguised as routine. It looks like choosing to invest instead of impress, like asking questions when others stay silent, like continuing, especially when no one is watching. The road may be lonely at first. You may walk it with shaking legs and an unsure heart, but with every step you get stronger. And one day those same people who doubted you may ask how you did it, and you'll smile, not in pride but in quiet gratitude, for the day you chose to listen to your vision rather than their fear. Habits create wealth. Rich Dad once said, "You don't decide your future, you decide your habits, and your habits decide your future." At first, Robert didn't quite understand. How could small, everyday choices shape something as big as financial freedom? But as time went on, and as he observed Rich Dad's life more closely, he began to see the truth behind those words. Rich Dad's life didn't run on luck. It ran on discipline, on quiet, consistent routines that most people overlooked. He paid himself first, no matter how much money came in or how many bills were due. Even if it's just a few dollars, he said, that money belongs to your future. If you don't protect it, no one will. He tracked his progress meticulously. Every month he reviewed his expenses, checked his investments, and adjusted his goals. He treated his financial life the way a great athlete treats their training, with focus, commitment, and a refusal to let small things slide. Robert saw that these habits weren't dramatic. They weren't glamorous, but they were powerful. They built momentum, they created direction. One of the first habits Rich Dad passed on to Robert was deceptively simple. Pay yourself first. This didn't mean splurging or treating himself before paying bills. It meant setting aside money for savings and investments before spending anything else. It created a mindset of ownership, a message to himself that his future was worth more than temporary comforts. At first, it was hard. Sometimes it felt impossible. There were months when Robert barely had enough to save. But Rich Dad insisted, if you always wait until you have extra, you'll never start. Force your brain to find a way. Your mind is your greatest asset. That challenge became a game. Instead of saying, I don't have enough, Robert began asking, how can I make this work? And with each small success, his confidence grew. Another powerful habit was reflection. You can't grow what you don't measure, Rich Dad said. So Robert began keeping a journal, not just for numbers, but for thoughts. He recorded how he felt about money, what triggered his spending, and what made him feel in control. Over time, he noticed patterns. He began to understand his own psychology, and as his self-awareness deepened, so did his ability to make wiser financial choices. Rich Dad also warned about the most dangerous habit of all, impatience. Wealth, he said, is like a tree. You plant a seed, you water it, you protect it, but you don't dig it up every day to see if it's grown. Too many people gave up after a few weeks or months because they didn't see instant results. But Robert learned that consistency was the real magic. Even $10 invested with discipline could blossom into something powerful over time. As Robert practiced these habits, he noticed a transformation, not just in his bank account, but in his mindset. He no longer felt like a victim of circumstances. He felt like a builder. Each day, each choice, each quiet moment of discipline was shaping a future he could believe in. And that's when he realized, wealth doesn't begin with a big breakthrough. It begins with a decision, a routine, a habit, repeated not once but every single day. Failure is a stepping stone. There's a silence that follows failure, a heavy, uncomfortable stillness that wraps around your thoughts and makes you question everything. Robert felt it the first time he made a financial decision that didn't go his way. It wasn't a huge loss, but to a young mind chasing big dreams, it felt devastating. The investment flopped. The numbers were red. The confidence he'd been building crumbled like paper in the wind. He expected Rich Dad to be disappointed, maybe even angry. But instead, Rich Dad smiled gently and said, "Welcome to the club." Robert looked up, confused. "What club?" "The club of people who've tried," Rich Dad said. "The club of people who have dared to take action. See, Robert, failure is not the opposite of success. It's the tuition you pay to become great." Those words stunned him. In school, failure was a red mark, a signal that you didn't understand, that you didn't belong at the top. But Rich Dad's version was different. Failure, he explained, wasn't a dead end, it was a bridge, a necessary part of the process. A teacher in disguise. He told Robert a story about one of his early businesses, a small venture that completely collapsed within the first year. People laughed. His relatives told him to give up. The debt collectors weren't so kind. But Rich Dad didn't stop. "It was painful," he admitted, "but I learned more from that one failure than I ever learned from 5 years of success." Robert listened wide-eyed as Rich Dad listed out the lessons he'd taken from that failure, about cash flow, hiring, customer behavior, and decision-making. "Each lesson," he said, "became a stone in the foundation of my next business. Without that failure, I wouldn't be where I am today." That shifted something inside Robert. He realized that successful people weren't the ones who never failed. They were the ones who never quit. Rich Dad gave him a tool, a 3-question system he used after every setback. What did I learn? What would I do differently next time? How can I use this experience to grow? Robert began using it, especially during his early investment experiments. When something went wrong, he didn't beat himself up. He pulled out his notebook, answered those questions, and moved forward. The sting of failure didn't disappear, but it transformed. That became energy, fuel, wisdom. Still, it wasn't easy. The world around him didn't celebrate failure. Friends told him to play it safe. Some laughed when he shared a setback. His poor dad, with the best intentions, urged him to stay. In school, get a stable job and avoid risky mistakes. But Robert was learning that the real risk was stagnation. The real danger wasn't falling, it was standing still out of fear. He thought about a baby learning to walk. No one scolds a toddler for falling. They cheer them on, knowing each tumble brings them closer to balance. So why, he wondered, do adults treat failure with shame? Why do they let one stumble stop them from ever taking another step? Rich Dad answered that too. Because they were taught to fear mistakes, not to learn from them. But you, Robert, you can choose differently. So he did. Every setback became a stepping stone. Every misstep brought new insight. And with each one he grew, not just in knowledge, but in resilience, in courage, in character. And eventually he came to believe something that most never do, that failure is not the end of the story. It's just the beginning of a better chapter. Giving. Back and fulfillment. It was a warm golden evening when Rich Dad and Robert walked through a quiet neighborhood. Children played on the sidewalks. Parents sat on porches. A small community center stood at the corner, run down but alive with laughter and possibility. Rich Dad paused, looked at the building, and said something Robert would never forget. True wealth isn't measured by how much you keep. It's measured by how much you give. At first, Robert thought giving back was something you did after you became rich, when you had millions in the bank and more than you needed. But Rich Dad shook his head. Giving isn't about the amount. It's about the heart. Some people have little yet give generously. Others have plenty but live in fear of losing it. He went on to explain that real fulfillment comes not from accumulation, but contribution. Wealth, he said, is meaningless if it ends with you. But when you use your success to lift others, you multiply your impact and your joy. It was a kind of wealth that couldn't be measured on a balance sheet, a wealth of connection, of purpose, of legacy. Rich Dad shared a story of a friend who had built a scholarship fund for underprivileged students. At first, it seemed like a small gesture, just a few $1,000s a year. But over time, that fund helped dozens of young people attend college, build careers, and return to help their own communities. He didn't just give money, Rich Dad said. He gave hope. He created a ripple effect. Robert started to notice something else. Every time Rich Dad gave, whether it was money, mentorship, or even just his time, new opportunities seemed to find their way back to him. Not always immediately, and not always directly, but the energy he gave out somehow returned. Giving, Rich Dad explained, builds bridges. It opens doors. It brings people into your life who believe in generosity, kindness, and growth. And perhaps most powerfully, giving grounds you. In a world obsessed with more success, more fame, more money, giving reminds you why you started. It connects you to others. It keeps your feet on the ground even as your success rises. Robert began to see wealth in a new light, not just as financial independence, but as a tool for impact. He realized that the most fulfilled people weren't the ones who had the most, they were the ones who gave the most in their own way. So he started small, donating books to schools, mentoring younger students, listening without rushing, and every act of giving brought something back: joy, friendship, perspective. Rich Dad's final lesson on giving was simple: when you help others rise, you rise too. Never underestimate the power of a generous heart. That's where the richest kind of life begins. Lifelong growth and taking action. Now, years later, long after Robert had built his businesses and achieved financial independence, he sat quietly with Rich Dad, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The world around them had changed. Markets, technology, even people's dreams. But one thing remained the same: the power of mindset. Rich Dad leaned in and said, "Robert, the richest people in the world are not just those who own assets. They're the ones who never stop learning." He spoke with a calm wisdom, the kind that can only come from living fully, failing deeply, hand-giving generously. The moment you stop learning, you stop growing. And when you stop growing, you stop leading. Robert had seen it for himself. The most successful people he knew, entrepreneurs, investors, mentors, were all students of life. They read constantly, asked questions, stayed curious. They didn't just react to the world, they created within it. They weren't waiting for permission, they were taking action. That, Rich Dad emphasized, was the final secret. Don't wait. Start now. People wait for the perfect time, he said. They say, "I'll invest when I make more money," or "I'll start saving next year." But they never realize the best time is always now. Because now is the only time you actually have. He told Robert about two friends. One waited. He kept saying, "Someday." The other started small, just $10 a week. 10 years later, the one who waited was still dreaming. The one who started, financially free. Robert began to see opportunity differently. It didn't always show up dressed in success. Sometimes it looked like a challenge. Sometimes it looked like a book. Sometimes it was just a quiet instinct saying, "Try." And each time he acted on that instinct, his world grew. Rich Dad smiled and said, "You don't need a perfect plan. You need a decision. You don't need more money. You need more courage. Start with what you have, where you are, right now." And he added one more truth, one that surprised Robert. Success doesn't just belong to the smartest or the luckiest. It belongs to those who show up, who take risks, who learn, fall, and rise again. That day, Robert made a promise to himself: never stop learning, never stop growing, and never wait for life to hand you a guarantee. Create your own future instead. And as he looked back on the lessons that had shaped him, from learning the difference between assets and liabilities to building habits, embracing failure and giving back, he realized that wealth wasn't just about numbers or possessions. It was about living with intention, with clarity, with courage. So now the question passes to you. What's the first small step you can take today? Because the future isn't something you wait for, it's something you build. One step, one lesson, one bold action at a time. If you found value in this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment to let us know your thoughts. Your support helps us bring even more meaningful stories to life for English learners everywhere. Here are 20 key vocabulary words and phrases that are repeated throughout the story, along with simple English explanations to help you understand and remember them. Asset. Something that puts money in your pocket like a business, rental property, or investment. It helps you grow your wealth. Liability. Something that takes money out of your pocket, like loans, cars, or big houses that cost more than they earn. Financial freedom. The ability to live the life you want without needing to work for money, because your income comes from assets. Mindset. The way you think and believe about something. In the story, a rich mindset means thinking about growth, solutions, and possibilities. Rat race. A never-ending cycle of working, earning, and spending without real progress or freedom. Cash flow. The movement of money in and out of your life. Positive cash flow means you're earning more than you're spending. Passive income. Money you earn without working all the time, like rental income or dividends from investments. Pay yourself first. A habit where you save or invest money for your future before spending it on anything else. Consumer. A person who spends money to buy things, often focusing on appearance or lifestyle rather than growth. Investor. A person who uses money to buy or create assets that generate more income over time. Financial education. Learning how money works, including saving, investing, and understanding. Taxes, debt, and assets. Abundance. A mindset that believes there is enough opportunity and wealth for everyone. It helps people grow and give. Scarcity. A mindset of fear and lack. It keeps people stuck by making them believe there's never enough. Fear. An emotion that stops people from taking risks or trying new things, especially with money or change. Greed. The desire for more money or things, often without thinking about the long-term consequences. Failure. A moment when things don't go as planned. In the story, failure is seen as a teacher and an important part of success. Opportunity, a chance to grow, improve, or invest. Rich Dad teaches Robert to always look for opportunity. Discipline, the ability to control your actions and stick to good habits, especially when it comes to saving or investing. Learning mindset, a way of thinking where you always want to grow, read, and improve, no matter how successful you are. Giving back, sharing your time, knowledge, or money to help others. It brings purpose, connection, and new opportunities.